All right, it is 5:32. I think we can begin. Good evening to everyone, to our panelists in the room, and to everyone joining us online. My name is Ekeminiabasi Eyita-Okon, and I am an academic at the Wits School of Governance. I want to take this opportunity to welcome you to another yet interesting and what promises to be a thought-provoking conversation on the challenges of international relations and diplomacy being at the crossroads where the Middle East and North Africa region is concerned. And on behalf of our head of school and colleagues at the Wits School of Governance, we would like to give you a warm welcome and to let you know that to be a part of conversations like this is possible, to be at the forefront of conversations like this is possible, because at the Wits School of Governance, we do offer academic programs, executive courses, and online programs that addresses development, policy, and economic challenges with expert tuition and supervision. And since our inception in the early 1990s, the school has contributed to public service capacity development. It has played a pioneering role in using the independent and neutral space of the university to facilitate interaction between civil society, the academy, and practitioners. Please note that our 2025 July intake closes on 23rd July 2025, and our 2026 intake opens in January. Opens on the 1st of July, 2026. So looking forward to having you at the Wits School of Governance and being a part of our program. All right, that being said, I would like to take a moment to welcome our speakers who are here in the room. I think for some of us, these are probably familiar faces. But yes, I think let's get right into it. So with me this evening, I have three incredible speakers. First up, we've got Dr. Thelela. Dr. Thelela is a respected corporate governance and leadership scholar in management and social scientist. She's also a legal scholar specializing in international business law and published author. She's a researcher at the Global Center for Academic Research, South Valley University, and her research focuses on corporate governance laws in South Africa and the UK, governance in general in the continent of Africa, international trade law, women empowerment, and leadership development frameworks. So a warm welcome to you, Dr. T, and thank you for taking the time to be here.
Thank you.
Next up, we've got Prof Adebayo, who is a distinguished professor here at the Wits School of Governance. He completed his first degree in international studies at the Ahmadu Bello University and his doctorate in politics at the University of Leeds. He's here with us at the School of Governance with over 3 decades of experience in research, training and capacity enhancement, program development, and institution building. And most of his research has centered on the interplay of politics and economics in the development experience. He has published extensively in the field of research, and among his most impactful work are the studies he published on the politics of the economic reform programs promoted by international financial institutions in Africa during the 1980s into the new millennium. A warm welcome to Prof. Bayo, often dubbed Prof. BZ. And finally, we've got Naim. Mr. Naim Jenah is here with us as well. He is a senior researcher, humanity at the Mapungwe Institute. He was formerly the executive director of the Afro-Middle East Center, AMEC. Mr. Jenah is currently deputy chair of the Dennis Hurley Peace Institute, an advisory board member of the World Congress for Middle East Studies, and an advisory board member of the Center for China-Africa Studies. He has written and edited numerous articles and books on the Middle East, feminism, and South Africa's politics, among other topics. He holds a master's in social sciences from the University of the Witwatersrand, so he's equally a proud Witsi. So welcome to you, Mr. Naim Jenah. All right, let's get right into it. So, as we are aware of the escalating tensions that we have seen between Iran and Israel in the last couple of days, since Friday, 13th of June, and the region or the conflict has been fueled by a cycle of provocation, retaliatory strikes, proxy confrontations, and all of these have rekindled conversations and even fears about a region-wide conflict with global implications. I mean, we've seen that countries have had to reroute their shippings because of to avoid Houthi patrolled waters. And that has had implications in terms of oil prices, in terms of food prices. But Israel's deepening military entanglements across Syria and Lebanon, as well as Iran's increasingly bold posturing in its region as well, has seen intense recalibration of alliances, deterrence, and diplomacy. And as you know, the MENA region is home to approximately, as of 2023, according to the World Bank, about 500 million people, and has one of the highest youth unemployment rates in the world. There is ongoing humanitarian crisis in Gaza, in Sudan, in Syria, in Yemen, staggering climate vulnerabilities. And yet against this backdrop, we are seeing some levels of bold diplomatic experiments, for instance, the Abraham Accord. And here we are today trying to make sense and take stock of the conflict and the tensions in the region. And of course, this is inspired by the recent Israel-Iran airstrikes or exchange of ballistic missiles on June 13th. So I would now invite each speaker to quickly reflect on the dynamics of the region. I mean, the region is quite big. Whatever dynamic or aspect you want to take to reflecting on the conflict and the regional dynamics in the MENA region, you're welcome to do so. So I'll start with Prof Bayer, and then Dr. Thelela, and then Mr. Naim Jenah.
Well, thank you very much, Ekemini, for this initiative. And good evening to the fellow panelists, as well as to those who have joined this webinar. There's a certain sense in which perhaps what we are witnessing currently in the confrontation between Israel and Iran was kind of predictable. The build up to the crisis that is before us has been going on for a while. And the attack on Iran, however regrettable it may be, fits, I think, fairly perfectly well with the pattern that we have seen over recent years, and which have been particularly highlighted by the terrible situation in Gaza, the attack on Lebanon, partly to try to get rid of Hezbollah from Lebanon, remembering that Hezbollah, even though with its own identity, was also in a sense an extended arm of Iran in its greater Middle East policy. And of course, the fall of the Assad regime in Syria and the spirited attacks on the Houthis. One thing which is common, I would argue, across these various zones of conflict is the determined effort to decimate the organizational and fighting capacity of those who are perceived by Israel to be its enemies, those whom it considers to be a threat to its existence. So that, for example, in Syria, it was not enough for the Assad regime to fall. It was also immediately a series of strikes that effectively wiped out the Syrian Air Force and many of the naval vessels of the Syrian Navy were sunk by the Israeli armed forces, in a sense, effectively to weaken Syria as one of the major opponents of Israel in the region. And you can see the same thing with the attacks on the Houthis and their control of Yemen, again, basically disabling their capacity to be able to, at least that is the intention. Whether it has succeeded or not is a different matter. And wars can be very complex. Sometimes it's not how mighty your arsenal is that determines whether you win or not, as we have seen repeatedly in the course of history. But I think, Ekemini, one of the bigger issues is the global geopolitical context within which all of this is also embedded, which I think we should always keep in mind. And as the conflict between Israel and Iraq, basically Israeli attack, preemptive attack on Iran unfolded, I went back to look at the book which was written by Mahmoud Mamdani in the 1990s, late 1990s, early part of the millennium, entitled Good Muslim, Bad Muslim. It's a deceptive title. It came in the aftermath of 9/11. But part of the idea was actually a study of the geopolitics of the MENA region and its position in the greater equation of power struggles in the international system. And Mahmoud Mamdani's basic thesis was that the confrontation with Iran has to be understood as part of a broader preparation for a confrontation with China in the context of shifts in global balance of power, in which the containment of China is actively pursued by Pax Americana as part of its own survival strategy. And I think it's not surprising, therefore, that many of the winners of the post-1945 order that is under challenge and that is unraveling in its own way find themselves aligned, as it were, behind Israel. In a sense, Israel is helping them to do what they would have loved to do themselves. And the Americans are likely to still join in weakening Iran to a point where it not only ceases to be what they consider to be a threat to Israel, but also neutralized in the broader geopolitical context. Keeping in mind, for example, that Iran has been a big source of supply of drones to Russia in the war between Russia, Ukraine, and NATO unfolding on Ukrainian territory. So let me leave it at that for now and allow other colleagues to come in. But I think we are seeing, in many respects, a crisis which, if not properly managed, could actually snowball into a possible third world war.
Definitely. Thank you, Prof. Dr. T.
Thank you so much. Good evening. Let me just make a disclaimer. I'm battling flu, but I couldn't miss the webinar, especially given what the President of the United States said. Was it yesterday to the press secretary that he's giving, he will give the decision in 2 weeks, as if the decision hasn't been already made. But, in the space of geopolitics, I couldn't miss it. To build on what Professor Bayo is saying, and I agree with him, if you're looking at the current conflict, Israel and Iran, you can't look at that conflict outside, the region, but also outside what's happening within the broader global space. But for me, the other angle that needs to be really interrogated, as Prof Bayo alluded to, is the post 1945 era, the era of the so-called multilateralism, the era of the so-called international law. And from a point of view of international law, the question perhaps that needs to be posed at this juncture, to what extent is really international law effective, that one state could decide unilaterally, in inverted commas, to attack, to use military attack to another state? Well, you can argue that, as Netanyahu has been saying it repeatedly, that it's self-defense. But whilst international law allows for self-defense, but what is the determination? What is that determinant for a state to pursue military attack? And it's only self-defense. But then let's go to the current conflict. Is there enough evidence that Netanyahu's government could bring to the table that Iran really was on the brink, or the threat was so imminent that they had to pursue the preemptive? And it would seem that it's not the case. And then it goes back to what Professor Bayo is saying. What does this conflict then in the overall means? They've always wanted to do it. I mean, there was that famous, I think it was leaked, a certain general, I can't remember, many years ago, from the United States. I think it was General Clark or something like that, who said he visited the Pentagon, and then he overheard a conversation with Chemney et al. That they must destroy the 9 Arab states. And I'm just saying that this is just the continuation of that, but it takes many forms. Prof Bayo has already spoken about the Al-Assad government being overthrown, which is a built-up over many years last year. But also, what does the instability, who benefits from the instability in the MENA region? Who benefits from the instability in Iran? I think the question, we all know the answer to it. It's up in the air. But then, as Prof Bayo had said, Israel has been emboldened after, a successful attack on Hezbollah. They feel they're confident, of course, having friends in certain offices of in the global architecture. In this case, I mean, having an ally of the president in the name of the president of the United States has really emboldened him. He is pursuing, Netanyahu's government is pursuing what he always wanted to pursue. So that's where we are. And as they say, when the elephants fight, the grass suffers. This is why then issues of international humanitarian law become a problem, because to what extent then are able to cushion people from these various places, both, well, you can argue Israel also, and also Iran. And then you're still dealing with the war in Gaza. You're not even done with it, but you're extending yourself. And clearly you are certain that with the support of your friends, you can do well. So we're dealing with the shift in geopolitics, but it's the continuation, it's oscillation. It's been doing this. And if you're looking at the meeting currently happening now in Geneva, you then pick up that the United States is taking a particular posture, not necessarily supporting it. If you follow what President Trump was saying on social media, and you look at what Macron is trying to say, the EU are trying to maneuver some diplomatic pathway for Iran. So we're sitting in that space. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Naim.
Thank you, Eki, and thank you to the Wits School of Government for the seminar. I'm going to add to and build on what's been said, and I hope I don't repeat anything, hopefully. But, we're living in actually a very dangerous moment right now. We have a genocide that's taking place in Gaza with 2.3 million people, some of the most despicable war crimes and crimes against humanity taking place. I mean, who of us would have imagined that we would see scenes of people being starved deliberately for months on end, and then told to go to aid distribution points where they would then be systematically fired upon and bombed. So we have a genocide unfolding on one side, and now this attack against Iran. Israel is currently fighting on 6 different fronts, at least. Gaza, the West Bank has been completely locked down. Last week, for the first time, I don't know about today, but last week, for the first time in decades, no one was allowed to pray at the Al-Aqsa Mosque, which for Palestinians, both Muslim and Christian, is a huge thing. The mosque and the Church of the Holy Sepulchre are national icons, apart from religious. So the West Bank, Gaza, the West Bank, Lebanon, Yemen, Syria, where it still occupies big swathes of territory, and now Iran. The attack on Iran last week, Friday morning, was completely against international law. The notion that this was a preemptive strike has no status in international law. There was no imminent threat, and therefore there's no self-defense defense for Israel about this. So the question is why this was undertaken, apart from the points already made about Israel having a sense of overconfidence in this particular moment. Why this attack right now? The main issue here is that Israel's objective in the region, and with regards to Iran in particular, is that it wants a dominance over the region. That dominance can be through diplomatic means like the Abraham Accords. It could be through military means. It could be by subjugating another state. Israel is not really interested in the American kind of fallacy of a project of bringing democracy, etc. Israel's not interested in that kind of thing. They don't really care about Iranians. They care about ensuring that Iran is weakened to an extent that it poses no threat. The threat that Iran poses has been thus far through its support for Palestinian liberation organizations, Hamas, Hezbollah, PFLP, etc. The first direct engagement that Iran got involved with Israel was last year, April and October. Israel, on the other hand, has been directly attacking Iran on numerous occasions. There's been the assassinations of scientists, nuclear scientists in the past, other actions that have taken place in Iran, and then last year we saw an increase of that. When this attack began on last week Friday, apart from the premise of it being illegal, the initial actions were two. Attacking nuclear installations is illegal under international law. Assassinating academics, like scientists, is illegal under international law. Bombing civilian areas, bombing hospitals. Now, they bombed a hospital. Now Iran has bombed one too, is illegal under international law. But the idea for why this took place and why it took place at this point in time, Israel's objective, as I said, is to weaken and subjugate Iran to its own benefit. Yet what we saw happening in the past couple of months is the global superpower, because we still have only one global superpower, deciding to engage in talks with Iran to reach an agreement that they would both be happy with, which would see Iran agreeing to not developing a nuclear weapon, which they've said for the past 45 years that they won't, and at the same time having certain sanctions against Iran lifted. If those sanctions were lifted, Iran would strengthen, not weaken. And that is why when those talks were announced, Israel was hopping mad. Got very upset at the United States, demanded that they don't happen. And when it was clear that they will happen and clear that they were actually making some progress, then it demanded that the result should be that Iran is not allowed to enrich uranium at any level. This, of course, is not enriching uranium is not illegal. Even enriching uranium to the 60% mark that Iran has done is not illegal. Now, let's make the point here that Iran does not have nuclear weapons. No one believes that Iran has nuclear weapons. Iran does not have a nuclear weapons program. It's not on the path to develop it. It can. By the way, I saw a news article today from 1995 from the New York Times saying that Israel and the US believe that Iran will have a nuclear weapon in 5 years. And that's been a repeated claim, every couple of years. So even up to 60% enrichment is not illegal. We might ask legitimately, why does Iran need to? Well, the only reason that they're doing it is to piss off the Americans after the Americans withdrew from the JCPOA. But Israel didn't want that to happen. So attacking Iran now, 2 days before the 6th round of these talks between the US and Iran, is a way of completely undermining those talks, ensuring that those talks do not happen. Iran doesn't get onto a pathway where sanctions against it are lifted. And of course, it's for Netanyahu's local political gains as well. What we're seeing over the past 7 days is not yet an all-out war, but an incremental increase or incremental escalation militarily, and that could lead to an all-out war. So, quickly, future scenarios. The one possibility is that the US gets involved on the side of Israel. If that happens, we will have an extremely messy situation. Iran has vowed that it will block the Straits of Hormuz. We know that the strait is already mined, and that it will attack American bases if America attacks it. The attack on American bases will not be only from Iran, it will be also from Iran's partners in the region, in Iraq, etc. Let's remember that multiple countries that surround Iran have American bases. So the regional conflagration would be disastrous if the US were to join. If the US doesn't join, two possibilities. One is that the US and Iran find some way of getting back to talks, even though Iran legitimately says that it can't be expected to talk while under fire. But they do that, and I think today's Geneva talks an indication that Iran is flexible in some ways on doing that. They do that, and then the US puts pressure on Israel to stop. Iran has said if Israel stops, it will stop. That's one scenario. The other scenario is that this war goes on for a longer term, for the next year, for more than a year. And if that happens, we'll see lots of death and destruction in both Iran and Israel. My last point, Professor Adebayo made the comment about the post-45 order. What we are seeing now is a complete dismantling of that order. By the way, that order was never meant for us. It was not meant for Africans. It was not meant for former colonized nations. It was an order that sought to regulate conflicts among people of the global north. Originally, the idea of international law, rules of war, was for Europeans. The fact that South Africa is audacious enough to go to the ICJ to claim that international law applies to us as well has really upset Europeans. We see that upset also on Friday with the German Foreign Office, Friday morning, late morning, before Iran retaliated. The German Foreign Office issued a statement. The first part of the statement says that they support Israel's right to defend itself. There was no defense here. The second part of the statement says they condemn Iran's attack on Israel. Iran had not even responded yet, right? And that is because all of the international law is supposed to apply to civilized people, not us barbarians. And when we try to make it apply to us, then it's a problem. It upsets everything. And I think what we're seeing now is an upsetting of that whole order that will lead to a restructuring of that order after a great deal of pain and suffering for all of us. Thank you.
No, thank you very much for your reflections. I think one running theme across everything that you've said as panelists is basically problematizing the fallacy of international law, because at this point, when we talk about Iran's uranium enrichment, it is legal to enrich uranium at 5%, 20%, whether for nuclear reactor purposes or for medical research purposes or for electricity generation purposes. And yet, irrespective of agreements that have been signed, constant reassurance by Iran that it will not develop a nuclear weapon, there are still threats against its stability and its existence in the region. So what does this mean? I think I'm going to come back to Thelela now, just rolling through the thread of international law. What does this mean in terms of the future of the global order? Because, I mean, you would think that international law, or having international law as the guiding principle under which states need to interact with each other, would come into effect. But yet the very custodians of this international law, the forefront of undermining this law. So what does this mean? What avenue, what other alternative does this policy create, especially where the MENA region is concerned?
Yes, thank you so much, Dr. Ekeminiabasi. It tells us one of many things, and to build on the last panelist, it tells us that the very architecture of the international law was never meant to serve everybody. So it was the fallacy from the beginning. And well, there's a debate that's raging in public discourse and I mean, even in academia, whether we should then pursue relentlessly reforms. But the problem with reforms, you have that architecture of the United Security Council, who's got the powers there, who decides what happens when, who's got the veto powers. So you really need to reconfigure the whole system of the international law. But how do you do that in this global order, in this current governance of the global order, hegemonies, Western hegemonies, pulling strings from back and forth? And when it comes to Africa, Africa is always in between. And then if there's a perception that even the Iran war is to bring China to the table, will China come to the table? Because China avoids, kind of pursuing wars. But what it tells us, Ekemini and colleagues here, is that the whole system of international law has always been a problem. And international law in its nature, it's even difficult to enforce. I mean, look at the brazenness of Netanyahu, even after the ICJ matter. He was working with so much confidence, so emboldened. And if it was an African leader, you could have a different debate about that. In fact, Western powers would be really on that African leader. And by saying that, I'm not condoning any bad conduct from our leaders. But the point that I'm making, the fact that Netanyahu after ICJ could really get the support of that nature tells you that, I mean, really, how dare you take one of us to the ICJ? That's the essence of it. And it continues, it continues. The other problem with the Middle East is that, and it's been ongoing for as long as we have been studying this area, is that the very pro-US Arab states pose a challenge, because you get a view of some distant posture, or even if there are backward conversations that are happening, everybody understands that this is a violation of international law, but nobody's gonna want to do anything. You know why? Because the forces behind are very powerful, such that you don't want to unsettle it. So the answer, Ekemini and colleagues, is that if you're pursuing reforms, and who pursues the reforms, and how do you try to dismantle the current form? I think it's going to be an uphill battle. Maybe there's a debate then for the multipolar world that you need alternatives. Are those alternatives strong enough at this current moment to bring alternatives to the table? Well, it's a debate on the table.
No, thank you very much. I think Prof Bayo, just drawing on what Dr. T has said, does this then create the opportunity to finally consolidate that we do exist in a multipolar world, or is this now ushering the evidence of multipolarity? in the global system. But also, in addition to that, is there still an opportunity for track one diplomacy here in resolving this conflict? The fact that the U.S. credibility at this moment is in question. European counterparts are looking to take the lead on getting Iran to the negotiation table on its nuclear program. Is there really any hope for track one diplomacy, or should we look at other kinds of diplomacy as a way of, tempering high tensions within the MENA region?
Thank you very much, Ekemini. It's, there's no moment in world history that is usually more dangerous than when there's the transition from an old power to a new power or a new set of powers. And usually old powers don't accept to decline peacefully. I think our biggest challenge as a global community is whether those who are the underwriters of the post-1945 global order can agree to decline peacefully and to share the space with a certain greater sense of, I don't know if equity is the right word to use, but to acknowledge at least that others have a voice and a say in making this planet of ours a place we can all call home. And I think it puts everything else into perspective. Those who are supposed to be the defenders of the principles, and keeping in mind Naeem's observation that as far as we are concerned in Africa, this was not an order meant for us. We are not there anyway. We are still under colonial domination, most of us. But keeping that even in mind, and you say that those who are supposed to defend the rules, and that's why we talk of a rules-based order that were agreed upon at Dumbarton Oaks and other places where these things were written, are the ones who are in the forefront of violating those rules. The lawlessness that you see, the unilateralism that has become commonplace, of somebody waking up and just deciding that I want to take Greenland. I want it for myself. And then tomorrow I'm going to set up a tower in Gaza on the blood and ashes that have been spilled there and are still being spilled. And it makes you wonder whether this is actually not the symptom of a declining power that is unable to come to terms with the fact that the pendulum is swinging decisively away. And that habit that has been cultivated over the decades of simply saying, whatever I say is the rule that matters and is what will apply. So I'm not even thinking that we are in a position to talk seriously about diplomacy in this context. For pragmatic reasons and for purposes of engaging global opinion, where there is still the possibility for that opinion, even quietly, to shape itself. The Iranians and others may go to Geneva and try to talk. But I think what is unfolding here is quite clearly an attempt that is no longer about diplomacy, but to use whatever force that is left in the arsenals of the hegemonic forces that are in crisis to try to almost hold on to something that is slipping away from them. And what you see playing out in foreign policy, you also see playing out in domestic policy. I mean, just take a look at all of the key architects of the post-1945 order, and you'd see a series of domestic problems and crises, one after the other. I will not even talk about Israel and Netanyahu. because Netanyahu every day is also fighting for political survival at home. And people don't usually pay enough attention to that. But there are many, not necessarily pro-Palestinian or pro-peace with neighbors and all of that, but who actually say that from the point of view of simple public morality and integrity of office holders, Netanyahu has no business being where he is as the prime minister, and they are fighting on that issue. So it's a story all over the place. You can be, you know, there are felons all over the place running the show, and having an objective personal interest also in expensive distraction, but one which also fits into a long-term project of trying to preserve power where the structural shifts are taking place. So it's not about Xi Jinping, it's not about Putin, it's not about, you know, whoever. You can remove all of those personalities from the equation, but we are dealing with a structural shift in the balance of power that is happening. And to the extent to which there is any morality that is to be left in the international system as it is today, it is what South Africa tried to demonstrate. Now, for students of international relations on the reality school, morality doesn't count for too much. But actually we see in this particular instance, a case in which morality, in fact, played a key role in helping to awaken global awareness to the horrendous situation in Gaza, and to say and expose the emperor, say to the emperor and to expose the emperor that you are actually naked. You cannot close your eyes to what is going on in Gaza. And in the meantime, you are berating much smaller, less horrific problems elsewhere, and almost trying to determine for the rest of the world what we should worry about at any point in time, according to your own convenience and according to your own interests. So you'll notice also, as you talked about diplomacy, that the United Nations is out. Mr. Secretary General does what he does best. He will issue routine statements which nobody is listening to. His spokesperson will address the UN press corps to say that the Secretary General appeals for restraint on all sides. But in the meantime, this Secretary General is also fighting for the survival of the UN. The budget of the UN has been severely dented, not least by the decision of Washington to substantially cut back on its funds. And within the organization itself, most staff are worried about their own career future and survival. They may have no jobs tomorrow. Committees have been set up to try to rationalize the agencies of the UN. Plans are being made to relocate to low-cost environments like Nairobi, shifting things out of New York as a survival strategy. And I usually say that, again, in context of the change from one order to the next, even though we don't have a clear picture of what the next order may be, don't be too shocked to wake up one day and hear that the UN has ceased to exist. Nobody made any major announcements about the death of the League of Nations. It just died, and everybody knew that it was dead and moved on to something else. So what will be the new order that will come? Well, we shall see. Under normal conditions, you would expect the UN to be involved in shuttle diplomacy to try to calm this between Tehran and Israel, to say restraint. But it's extremely hamstrung. It is not respected by those who created it. It is not taken seriously. It is starved of funding. And every senior official knows that there are lines not to be crossed before their visa is revoked unilaterally, and they are told to go back home. So here we are. I don't think that the prospects of diplomacy from that point of view are very high. Russia and China have offered that possibility even before the European Union, to say that this is not acceptable behavior. You cannot conduct global affairs on the basis of raw power and behave like a rogue state in the real sense of it. One final observation, moderator, is the fact that, you know, this Iran thing, and I mean, Naim, Thelela, you work on these issues. Remember Mossadegh? Mossadegh attempted, because Iran is an old civilization. Iran is an old civil, even older than the United States as a civilization, partial. Mossadegh's nationalism, the nationalization of the oil sector, led to a coup d'etat. That coup d'etat brought the Shah of Iran into power, royalty, which was seen as the solution that would put Iran firmly in the sphere of the West. And it seemed to work for a period of time, until 1979, when the Ayatollah returned from Paris to Tehran, and the Shah dynasty collapsed. And I wonder whether in some of the centers of power that are at the heart of the ongoing crisis, there's any sense of history at all. And if there's any sense of history, I wonder whether people actually do draw any lessons from history at all. Because at the end of it, what is being enacted presently is actually a non-solution. A non-solution which, in terms of the cyclical nature of the crisis in that area, we find that ultimately, unless people are allowed to claim their own dignity and respect, you cannot have peace. You cannot enslave people, put people in a condition of enslavement, and expect that as long as they can eat bread and drink tea, there will be peace in your own conception of what it should be. The question of Iran and its nuclear program is one which really does upset me a great deal. Because why is it possible that country X in the same region can have nuclear weapons and somebody else cannot have nuclear weapons? I mean, what's all of this? Which kind of double standards are these? What kinds of rules are being made? And somebody in Paris says that, well, the world cannot afford Iran having a nuclear bomb. Not only was Iran not developing a nuclear bomb, as Naim said, the director of the National Intelligence Agency of the United States actually told her president that there is no evidence at all. And according to the news reports, was simply waved off. We are giving the wrong type of information. We want you. Now, remember in Iraq, we were told that Saddam Hussein was about to commit, he had all kinds of weapons of mass destruction. And invasion after invasion, bombing, a country was destroyed. Nobody was held accountable. And at the end of the day, it was revealed that actually it was all fabricated. It was all fabricated in order to remove Saddam Hussein and dismantle the Ba'athist regime in that country. So clearly a regime change agenda, a very expensive regime change agenda, is also on the cards if they are able to push it through. It's just that the current government in Iran is not exactly a pushover, but that would be the desire. And my question is that you removed Mossadegh in the past, and you got the Ayatollahs. You remove the Ayatollahs, put some puppets for a period of time, and what will come after will be even more powerful than before. And that is not the way to win peace in our global system. 45 years of telling lies about Iran's nuclear program, and since 1979, Iran is about to do this, Iran is that, Iran is that. And in the meantime, we don't see any concrete evidence. And it's not a question of being partisan, to be saying, we are just supporting Iran, and all of that. It's just a question of principle. It's a question of principle. It's a question of integrity. It's also a question of balance. That for us in Africa, do we have a right to develop? Will not somebody sit up somewhere and say, you don't have a right to industrialize because it will cause problems for us? You don't have a right to do anything that will win your sovereignty and self-reliance. I think the implications are many, and it's also part of the reason why we must be part of any conversation about the making of this new order that has to come. Thank you.
Thank you. I can see that the questions are exploding. But Naim, I would like you to quickly just, in light of what Prof and said, do we have a role as sub-Saharan Africa? I mean, South Africa has taken the leadership in holding Israel accountable at the ICJ for crimes against humanity. But in addition to this new development, do we have a role as sub-Saharan Africa, as the African Union, as South Africa, to play in kind of bringing about some sort of, bringing key parties to the table, first of all, to have conversations, or at least try to broker some sort of deal that would allow different parties or warring parties to come to the table to dialogue and see what we can achieve? Is there any role that we can play as South Africa, as the African continent, as the AU? Is there anything that we can do in the meantime?
I could just, I'll answer that now. Just two very quick points to follow on what Professor Adebayo said. One is this thing about the UN and multilateral institutions generally. Not only are they ignored, I mean, they actively undermined. You have a situation in Gaza where schools, clinics flying the UN flag are bombed. Where the premier relief organizations of the UN, the World Food Programme, the UNHCR, UNRWA, etc., are prevented from distributing aid, and only an organization of mercenaries set up by Israel and the US is allowed to do so that people can easily be killed. It's an active war against the UN. The second point is about the question of whether diplomacy is possible in the current context. Now, I agree with Professor Adebayo and Dr. Thelela about the imperial decline that we are witnessing. We are privileged to be able to witness in our time. But part of that, it's not a linear process. I mean, part of that is the ebbs and flows that go with it. And one of those ebbs and flows kind of thing that we're looking at now is that the strongest power within that empire, the United States, has a president who's really much more concerned about himself than he's concerned about even his own country. And that means that, I mean, Trump really actually believes that he can win a Nobel Peace Prize. As ridiculous as that might sound to all of the rest of us. That actually opens the door for the possibility that in the next 2 weeks he might change his mind. He does every hour or so change his mind. He might change his mind and might decide that it's useful to him to engage in some talks and stop this impending war, and then make himself out to be a peacemaker. The other thing around him is that those who are around him fall into two camps. The one that want to completely and unquestionably support Israel and go to war on Israel's behalf, and the other that is more kind of America first, we shouldn't get involved in wars. So that also opens a possibility that diplomacy might have some glimmer of hope here. Your question about us, I think that what's important for us as Africans, firstly, is to realize that we are not distant from this. We sometimes talk as if these things are happening elsewhere and we are commenting on them and analyzing them, and they don't really affect us directly. No, they do. This phase that we are in, starting frankly from October 2023, which includes the genocide, includes the Lebanon, includes now the attack on Iran, etc. This phase that we are in is a phase that is that is in a sense a beginning of a new kind of war against the global South, against the former colonized world, because the former colonized world or some parts of it, is no longer happy to be subservient and go along with the wishes of their former masters. I mean, what we're seeing over the past few years with so-called francophone countries, and how they've been colonized until now, many of them, and how they are moving away from that, and the ICJ case and other such things. If, as Africans, we don't recognize that this is the beginning of a new form of war against all of us, and think of this as distant, that's a big problem. So I don't think we have a role to play in terms of mediating between the warring parties, because I don't think that we are in that league. Even as the AU, Israel's not going to listen to anyone except the United States, possibly. So we don't have that role. But the role that we do have is to, while that is happening there, to ensure that we strengthen ourselves as a continent and as a global South bloc, to be able to withstand the force and the pressure that's going to be coming soon against all of us. If we remain divided, and even if we look at BRICS is divided. Right? I mean, South Africa has issued one statement about what's happened in the past week. India fully supports Israel, is the largest purchaser of Israeli weapons. China is vocal, but is not going to get more involved than that. Same with Russia, and Russia also has its own war going on, etc. Right? So the global South, as long as we don't find a way of singing from the same, or at least having the same hymn sheet, we are going to not survive very well the next phase of this war that's taking place. The destruction that my other colleagues have said of the multilateral system is going to be disastrous for us. I mean, just the suspension of USAID aid, the impact of that on the African continent, apart from South Africa, has been quite huge. That's just USAID. With the UN, I mean, forget about the Security Council, which we can agree is hamstrung and quite useless. But can you imagine if the World Food Program closed down, if UNHCR closed down, if WHO closed down? The impact of all of that on the global South would be massive. Are we preparing for that? Are we preparing to be able to have a sense of solidarity within the global South, so that when this kind of war erupts against us, we are prepared? I think that kind of preparation is extremely important for all of us. And what is happening now in the imposed war and illegal war on Iran is a wake-up call. If the past 20 months of genocide have not been, then this should be for us.
Thank you very much, Naeem. Would any of the speakers like to respond to what Naeem has said? Because I can see in the chat there's so many questions, so I want to turn to the chat. Like to respond? Yes.
Yes. Let me just pick one or two. I agree with my colleagues. I saw a question. I didn't read the whole question, but Prof TK is asking, I think, whether Iran sort of was misled or by trusting Trump. I think the answer to that question, because there was supposed to be a sitting of a process that would sort of start a diplomatic pathway. The answer to that question is very simple, is that Trump oscillates. It also depends on what day and what events are happening. And many, even within the US, are saying, within the US government that are saying that that meeting on Sunday was never going to happen. And I think Prof Bayo has already answered that question. By attacking Israel, by attacking Iran on that Friday, and then it undermines that very process. Why are you sitting? Because then it puts Iran, sorry, I've got an irritated throat, on the back foot. So if you're dealing with a President Trump in this a space, dangerous space, well described by my colleagues, and not very clear who's the leader of the international order as we knew it before. We're assuming it, but it looks like there's some variations shifting. So we're sitting at that space, TK, and whether they were misled or not, it's really a debatable, but it would seem that President Trump is looking at two scenarios in the United States. You've got your Tucker Carlson, who say, you told us that America First policy, we're going to be focusing here at home. Why go to wars? And then you've got others who want to go to war. And I don't know. I mean, he's got the favorite time period of 2 weeks. Everything, give me 2 weeks. In 2 weeks, I will decide. And then as Naeem has put it, there's also that Nobel Prize hanging over his head. So he may decide that not necessarily for anybody's interest, but for himself, that perhaps let he continue. But it's going to be interesting to see the outcome of the meeting in Geneva this evening, whatever that would come out of it. It would give some signals, especially that Lamy, the Secretary of State from the United Kingdom, had flown first to the United States before he went to Geneva. So I mean, sort of to get the mandate, you would say, from the United States, and then he went to Geneva. So we're sitting there, and I think, I don't know, I'm not looking at other questions, the African states.
Yeah, I will.
Yes.
I think, and then Prof Bayo, a quick response.
Yeah,
Or
no,
you want to wait?
thank you very much. I would say that perhaps a few days ago they were telling us, give us 48 hours and the Ayatollahs will fall. And then a few more missiles were fired by the Ayatollahs. And they managed to beat all kinds of domes that are supposed to have been erected over Israel and to hit some targets. I think it is actually the quote-unquote battlefront situation that will ultimately probably drive people back to finding a diplomatic channel to try to at least achieve a truce for a period of time. I have a feeling that Israel overestimated its ability to overwhelm Iran, probably thinking it would do the same thing as it did with Assad in Syria, and have it done within a couple of days. Today's reports tell us that it is actually Americans who intercepted Iranian missiles in the face of the failure of the Israeli dome that was supposed to intercept those missiles. And I think, as I said, in the end, it's going to be that component together with the internal contradictions of MAGA in the United States, because after all, this also flies in the face of what Mr. Trump and his MAGA ideologues proposed, which is mainly that we are for peace, we don't want war, we just want to get Americans prosperous and all of that and all of that. That's where, in a sense, I can say that my hope would lie. Ultimately, that anybody will take diplomacy seriously. But and of course, the danger that the longer this is prolonged, the more the risk that others will be drawn in to the conflict, whether they want it or not. And I think whatever Mr. Trump decides, the day, whatever day he decides to implement what he has decided in one form or the other, because I don't think that there's a non-decision where we are presently. Whatever day he decides to play his hands openly, we are likely also to see both state and non-state actors on the side of Iran not simply staying indifferent to the situation. I wanted to agree completely with Naeem.
Okay.
See, we are in a situation where giants may be fighting, but those who bear the worst brunt of that fight are the weakest in the system. And already I keep sounding the alarm that there is a creeping process of recolonization that we are seeing on our continent. People are taking it very lightly. Land is being acquired on a massive scale, not on lease, but on freehold, in the name, for example, of what you do, Ekemini, in the name of clean energy, carbon, carbon things, carbon this, carbon that, and you buy an entire forest and get it on freehold, and it becomes your land. Apart from those who are buying from the Gulf states, for example, in order to feed their population. Africa has the most arable land left in the world. But assuming that somebody decided tomorrow that we're going to resettle some of the Gaza people somewhere in Africa, what will we do about it? Are there no leaders present in Africa today who for a fee will accept? For a fee. They will accept to be paid in order to be seen to, and we'll call it a victory in international diplomacy. And these are the kinds of things which we need to take much more seriously. So that's why I say I agree completely with Naeem that this is actually an occasion for serious soul searching about what Pan-Africanism means. Is it just the slogan that you mouth? I'm not even going to go into third world solidarity and all of that. But keep in mind that objectively, our continent is also seriously divided. We are not only fragmented, but we are seriously divided. The admission of Israel as an observer into the African Union was the greatest manifestation of the setback that we have undergone from a position where the continent was almost unanimous in declaring its solidarity with the people of Palestine, to a situation where a president of the AU Commission, backed by a number of African presidents who showed their hands at the debate on the admission of Israel to observer status, actually unilaterally admitted Israel to that position. And it's an uphill task in a situation in which, I'm sorry to say, there is also a crisis of leadership on our continent. Who is the voice? Which are the voices? It cannot be the young man in Burkina Faso, Captain Traoré. Half of his country is occupied by jihadists. And every day there is an attempt to overthrow that government. It cannot be the Malian. It cannot be Niger, those who have repudiated France in a most decisive manner. You look around the continent and you ask, I think this is really, if I were an African leader today, I would be saying we do need an extraordinary session and drop all our titles at the gate and face the situation that actually we are confronted with a potentially existential crisis. Again, I go back to history. When there is a swing from one old order to the next. Those who pay the price are the weakest in the system. It was swings from one order to the other that led us into colonialism, into the slave trade, and so on and so forth. And it's really up to us whether we want to continue to be victims instead of joint rule makers in the shaping of a new global order. In order to play our role effectively, we have to be prepared to also drop some of the things that hinder our capacity to act together collectively and to build a sense of collective sovereignty instead of striving for individual fragmented quote-unquote excellence. Thank you.
On the admission of Israel as an under observer status at the AU, I think we would need to take the Christians to task on that one because of the perception of what Israel represents according to biblical terms, and that has seemed to be the way or the direction or the reason behind certain players' support for Israel. And I think just to also note that if Trump gets a Nobel Peace Prize, I'm definitely vying for one as well. And I'm hoping that I get your support for that. Okay, so now to the Q&As. There's a lot of questions in the chat, so I will just throw them at the panelists and feel free to take a dig at anyone. Thank you to our audience for all the questions in the chat. We really do appreciate you for taking the time to engage with us. So Molosani Moloi says, greetings to all the panelists. The Israel-Iran war can be regarded as a war influenced by other states. No country to the size of Israel who just in war in Gaza can engage in another war at a short space of time. The question is how the influencer benefit does what? How the influencer benefit does in whatever decision of actions Israel has taken. Okay, I'm not sure if we caught that, but I think she's trying to basically take stock of Israel's ability, or who is behind Israel's capacity, or who is capacitating Israel to engage in multiple wars in the region at the same time, because then we get to see who the puppet master is. Reniva Furi, thank you for your question, says, given the link...
Eki, can I make a
Yes.
suggestion? I think between the chat and the Q&A, we've got more than 20 questions.
Okay.
Perhaps the three speakers, we should just have a quick look and then choose what questions we want to respond to.
What questions you want to? Okay, that's fine.
Okay.
Please go ahead. Please go ahead.
Okay.
Temba, I see your hand is up. Do you want to say something?
Are you talking to me?
No, the
okay.
there's Temba.
I've unmuted Temba
in the room, and the hand is up. Temba, would you like to say something? Okay, thank you. Temba, are you there?
I'm not sure if he's trying to speak, but he's unmuted.
But I see that he did leave his question in the chat, so we'll definitely get to it. Thank you for your question.
Shall I kick off, Eki?
Yes, you can kick off. I'm just checking with my panelists. Let me check with the panelists. Are you seeing the questions in the Q&A? All good?
Yeah.
Okay. Yes, Naim, please go ahead.
Okay, let me take two questions for starters. One is from Ayabulela Lakavu. Who says that Iran historically does not place value on dialogue or diplomacy. It's not a member of the Arab League nor the GCC, given that great powers prefer to use force against nations they deem second-class citizens of the liberal. It's not true. Look, I mean, one of the biggest diplomacy dialogue sessions was what led to the JCPOA, which took 2 years to accomplish, the commonly known as the Iran nuclear deal, which is a fairly decent thing. It was Iran on one side with 6 powers on the other, and they came to a deal. Iran has been involved with dialogue and diplomacy in the region with regards to Syria, together with Turkey and Russia, for example. Right now, it's been involved in dialogue with the Trump administration. Who could think that there would be anyone worse to talk to? But they have. They're not a member of the Arab League because Iran is not an Arab state. They're not a member of the GCC because the GCC is a club of Gulf Arab states. So you can't expect them, but they're part of NAM, they're part of BRICS, where they do fit. So Iran has made it clear that they're willing to be involved in diplomacy. But let's also make this point, that in Iran, and I'm talking about Iranian people, there's a deep-seated anti-Americanism. And it goes back, anti-Americanism and anti-Britishness. And this goes back to, the early 20th century, if not before, with the British Tobacco Company, etc. And then the overthrow, as Professor Adebayo said, of the first democratically elected president of Iran, Mohammad Mossadegh. And then later, after even the Iranian Revolution in 1979, there was a strong strand of anti-Americanism, not only among the Islamists, but also the leftists who were part of that. Immediately thereafter, there was the war that Iraq launched against Iran, and Iraq was supported by the United States. Right? Then Iraq was invaded by the US, and the common thing among Americans was breakfast in Baghdad in Iraq, lunch in Tehran, and supper in Damascus. Now, when you say things like that, do you really expect that that place that you claim you want to have lunch in is going to happily welcome you, right? So this kind of the Iranian suspicion of Americans is very deep-seated. Yet they engage with this kind of diplomacy with them. Let me refer to now Reniva's 2 questions very quickly. Reniva's first question was, given the link between the current military aggression against Iran and efforts to weaken China's global hegemony, is there a likelihood that China will support Iran? If yes, will there be direct retaliation from the US and other NATO countries? China is supporting Iran diplomatically and rhetorically. I don't believe that China will go beyond that. It's not its style. It doesn't get involved in these kind of conflicts in general. And China also realizes that the US is its long-term rival. It's not going to provoke the US into a war right now when it has, objectives that go forward for the next 50 years. In similar vein, Reniva, many of us after the 7th of October 2023, many people were saying, well, where is Iran? Just leaving the people of Gaza to their own devices, not supporting them at all. Where are all the missiles you claim to have, etc.? Well, can you imagine what would happen now? In retrospect, we can say, if by the end of October, if Iran got involved and started firing missiles against Israel, the United States would have come in. Today, we would be having a very different conversation. What Iran did was pace itself very much differently. And so now we are at a situation where the aggression against Iran came from Israel, not the other way around. China, I think, would play the same kind of game. The second question from Reniva: what will be the likely alignment of other countries in the West Asian, North African regions be should the Iran-Israel conflict escalate? I think this is a very important question. If the conflict remains, if it becomes a war between Iran and Israel without United States involvement, then I think to a large extent it would be just the two of them. The other countries in the region almost all other countries in the region have condemned Israel's attack. They won't do much more than that. They'll just sit back and watch. Even from the Iranian side, its own allies I don't believe will get much involved if the US doesn't. So its allies in Iraq, for example, are not going to start attacking American bases if the US doesn't get involved. If the US gets involved, then we have a very different situation, because then you'll see that Iran's allies in Iraq, in other countries, will launch attacks against American interests. But the more interesting question, for example, is what happens to a country like Qatar, which is at the same time a very good friend of Iran. They share a gas field, the largest gas field in the world, and also hosts the largest American military base in the region, the Al Hudaid base. Will Iran attack Qatar? Or will Qatar take a preemptive measure to demand that the US not launch any attacks against Iran from Qatari territory? If it does, will that work? Will the US listen to Qatar? Saudi Arabia will prefer to just issue condemnations against Israel and remain neutral. But if the US gets involved, what happens to will Saudi Arabia say no to the US using its airspace? If it says yes, then Iran could attack Saudi Arabia. So it could be a very, very messy situation, particularly for those countries in that region in West Asia.
Yes. Let me follow quickly. I see that we're going to run out of time. Building on Bongani's questions, Bongani is asking a number of questions. Am I muted? Can you hear me?
We can hear you, Dr. Thelela.
Oh, yeah. Okay,
we still have
thank
a
you.
bit more time.
Oh, okay. All right. Thank you. I'll pick Bongani's questions first. Bongani is asking a number of questions. The first one, whether Israel is fighting a proxy war. Some of the questions, Bongani, I think we've already answered them, that it's a yes and no. Remember, the issue of Iran, the Iran question, has always been on the table for a very long time. Past 45 years, they've been arguing that Iran has got this nuclear program. So it's not necessarily a Israel, desire to do so. Of course, Netanyahu's government for the longest of time have been after Iran, but don't exclude the United States there. Don't exclude NATO bloc from there. They've all of them have been after the so-called a nuclear program in Iran. So you can argue the yes or no there. But this one, the appetite of Netanyahu, as we said at the beginning, really has been upgraded after all the events of the past 2 or 3 years that he thought he could go. And then the other question that you're asking, whether the UN can avert a very much possible, well, the UN, as it stands, it cannot. We have answered that question, Bongani. It's weakened. It's weakened by the very people who are supposed to be the holders of the so-called the international order, the global order that all of us were supposed to aspire to. So the UN, as it stands, is just a body, but with nothing there. There's no support. I mean, if you're looking at the United States, how much they've cut their contribution to the UN, it tells you they are collapsing it. And it's not only the UN, all bodies, all international bodies, they're doing that. So to expect a United Nations to do something, and remember, when you're sitting in the Security Council, you've got veto powers. What are the veto powers? So it talks to the broader security governance globally. And then let me quickly pick Melinda's question, whether Africa can take a collective action really for diplomacy. I think Professor Adebayo has answered that question. Fragmented and divided. I thought we were only fragmented, Professor Adebayo. And then I was steering away from being divided. I loved the fragmentation. It sounded more like aligned to the 1884 Berlin, but were fragmented and divided. And the very fact that the AU you must think deeply about the AU embracing Israel as part of the mission. It tells you something. And what do South Africa interpret that, especially at the backdrop of the ICJ case? So fragmented and also divided. And so a divided house can't take anyone to anywhere until our house is in order. I guess, Melinda, only that time we can do that. And then let me take the last question, I think from Moluwisa, if I'm pronouncing the name correctly. It's on the US stance. Well, the US stance is, I'm of the view that the decision has been made, but it's going to oscillate. And then there's the 2 weeks. We will hear what they say. President Trump may decide, as we've already alluded to, that he may decide to take a diplomatic posture, not because he has decided to be really of moral courage, but for reasons perhaps better known to him. But we'll wait and see, because there's unpredictability in the United States, and the foreign policy of the United States is unpredictable, as the United States has become, not only during the Trump era, by the way, even during Democrats' presidents. I mean, if you're looking at the matter of Libya, we don't have time to go there. It was during Obama's time, and people avoid talking about the failures of the Democratic Party, even on foreign policy, even on that region. They continue. I think I would pick those. The regional instability, I think, has been picked by Naeem, so let me drop it. Thank you, Ekemini.
Thank you. Prof Adebayo?
Yeah, no, thank you very much. There's Umar Farouk Ali, who was wondering whether the current situation, including all of the hypocrisy, backtracking, double standards, and all that we see on display, would not in fact lead us into a new era of nuclear proliferation, as relatively weaker actors seek to acquire the bomb as a means of protecting themselves and ensuring that they are listened to. And I think it's not an irrelevant scenario to keep in mind. Obviously, we already live in a situation of mutually assured destruction. The fact that an international rule, which has been violated in this case, exists that prohibits the bombing of nuclear sites, is part of the attempt by the global community at a certain point in time to limit the consequences, radiation and others that could flow from such action, which, as I said and Naeem mentioned earlier on, has been violated flagrantly by Israel. But one is bound to come to that conclusion that, you know, maybe Kim Jong-un of North Korea is not as mad as may be assumed. They say that the only way to protect his little hermit republic is simply to be armed to the teeth and ready to fight and have the capacity to also cause and inflict as much damage on those who will seek to either overthrow the regime or destroy the country, and so on and so forth. Now, we already have a lot of nuclear powers, more than enough in the world. India, Pakistan, North Korea nowadays, Israel, never formally declared but understood by all to have the bomb, together with the traditional actors. And I think this is all taking place in a context in which also, at least under the in the period since the onset of the war in Ukraine, there has been a decision by some of the two big powers, the United States and Russia, to backtrack on some of the agreements they reached during the Cold War years to limit the testing of new weapons and also control the numbers of bombs in their arsenal and so on and so forth. What is clear without any question is that we are in an era of a new arms race. We're in the era of a new arms race. The European Union countries have significantly increased their budget. I think Germany, under the new chancellor, they passed an extraordinary budget for the rearmament of Germany. Germany is opening military bases in Central Europe for the first time since 1945. It's a sea change that we are witnessing, and it's a positioning for what is to come. It's almost as if there's an expectation by the big powers that a war is inevitable and to better prepare themselves for it. We are not in a position, clearly, as a continent to embark on that kind of massive armament acquisition. Neither the capability nor the financial resources to do so, and in a short period of time. But I hope that at the very minimum, the circumstances that are unfolding will compel a greater sense of African unity that will, that word morality, that will bring the moral question to the center of the construction of a new global order. So that will be my response to you, Umar Farouk. I think most of the other questions that I saw have been addressed by colleagues. There's considerable amount of work to do at home, also in our countries. You mentioned it as a light-hearted observations, Ekemini. But I think in Africa, as perhaps in some parts of the United States, the Bible Belt, and in other Christian communities around the world, there's a lot of positions that are taken on the assumption of certain things that are purportedly said in the Bible. And regardless of what we are witnessing in our everyday experiences, what is going on in Gaza, and particularly, there are those who just simply are able to eat dinner without being worried about the images, those painful images. Go to sleep because after all, this is all biblical and Israel is almost infallible. I'm not sure that that is itself entirely helpful for a people who are easily vulnerable to being victims, such as we are in Africa, and who in the last 600 years have also been the victims of changing international balances of power at one point or the other. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your reflections. I see a question by Khomotso asking about the impact on global sea shipping supply routes. I think just to quickly answer that question, I mean, you can see it play out in terms of food prices, oil prices, I mean, even the stocks market. Definitely there's been anxiety since Friday, the 13th of June. And so there's been a pulling out of players from the market. But what that has done is that it has caused a rerouting of shipping of goods through the Red Sea. Countries like East African countries in particular are now avoiding the Red Sea because it's now basically Houthi patrolled water. And so there's been a rerouting through the Cape of Good Hope, which definitely increases insurance premiums where shipping companies are concerned. definitely would have an impact in the final consumer, because you have to pay a higher cost for food. So thereby increasing the risk of food insecurity, not necessarily by the inavailability, but by how the affordability issue where food insecurity is concerned. You've also seen energy volatility in the energy market. Prices of oil has definitely surged. And so these are the effects of the ongoing conflict in the region. So it's becoming impossible to separate the politics or the geopolitics from the geoeconomics. And these things are not necessarily confined to just one region, as people often famously say that when one part of the world sneezes, everybody else catches a cold, because of how integrated and how interdependent our respective economies are in the world. I hope that answers your question. Any final parting shots from our panelists? And thank you all for the great questions. I read through the questions, I think, in some way, shape, or form during the conversation and during the responses by the panelists. We were able to touch on a few things or some aspects of your questions, maybe not in totality as you had hoped. But I would like to give our panelists just a few minutes to give any, parting shots, any encouragement for me to vie for the Nobel Peace Prize, and maybe assure me that they would vote for me if I do. Thank you in advance.
Well, you're not
with
going to win.
Naeem.
You're not going to win, Eki, if you keep accusing Christians of supporting Israel on the continent. Remember that Muhammad Faki Musa, who granted Israel surreptitiously its observer status, is Muslim. That one of the biggest supporters of Israel in the AU is Morocco, which is a majority Muslim country. So, I mean, I agree. I think the role of evangelical Christian organizations on the continent, supported by American such organizations, is a big push for moving the continent towards Israel. But those particular Muslims are not innocent. Two quick responses, if you allow me, Eki, to two questions. One is by Caswell. How far can this conflict push Iran into using its energy and nuclear capabilities for military purposes and not just civilian? So on the nuclear thing, the first leader after the revolution of Iran, Ayatollah Khomeini, passed a fatwa saying that it was prohibited to develop nuclear weapons. After he died, the next leader, Ayatollah Khamenei, the current leader, passed the same fatwa. But if it's a situation where Iran is facing an existential danger, as it possibly could be in the next few weeks, if the US gets involved, it's possible that fatwa might change. And it'll be an entirely counterproductive move then, because instead of preventing more nuclear weapons from being developed in the region, Iran could then push to actually develop a nuclear weapon. They have the capability and capacity to do that, clearly so, and could have a quick nuclear weapon within months even. Then a question by Tebogo Rachabiane. One of your 5 questions, Tebogo. The first one, what are the root causes of the ongoing conflict between Israel and Palestine, and how can they be addressed? The root of that is occupation, which the International Court of Justice has ruled is illegal. Apartheid, which is practiced not only in the occupied territories, but even in Israel itself by the Israeli state. And now genocide, as well as colonialism. In terms of the international law definitions of those things, there has not been since 1948 a Palestinian state. So if we say ongoing conflict between Israel and Palestine, it's a bit incorrect. There's a Palestinian people who live under occupation. How can they be addressed? Well, one might have said a little while ago, international law, etc., etc. Right now, I would say that the only way that these problems, the apartheid, the occupation, colonialism, and genocide, can be addressed in the future, is to ensure that and work towards having a single state from the Jordan River to the Mediterranean Sea, that is a democratic state in which everyone has an equal say and equal rights. There is no other solution that will work in terms of what is required from a human rights perspective and the perspective of people's dignity, etc. We all have a role to play in that. I mean, and let me end on this note that, you know, we all laud South Africa, of course, for taking that case to the ICJ, an ongoing case, and you know we got support for it globally from especially publics around the world, more than states. But right now, South Africa is the largest exporter of coal to Israel after Colombia stopped. Israel uses that coal to power its artificial intelligence weaponry that is responsible for much of the killing in Gaza and in the West Bank. We are therefore supporting this genocide. And in terms of the Genocide Convention, all states have the obligation to prevent a genocide from taking place. Now, we as a state, as a South African state, are saying there's a genocide, but we're allowing our coal to fuel that genocide. There's something wrong here. We also, as a state, allow our citizens to go to Israel, to join the Israeli occupation forces and murder babies in Gaza. There's a disjuncture here between what we say in The Hague and what we do in terms of policy. And I think that we need to address those if we want to address and help to resolve the genocide that's taking place and this 80-year-old occupation, colonialism, and apartheid by Israel.
Thank you very much, Naeem. Prof Adebayo?
Yeah, thank you very much. Indeed, one question which I saw was about the Arab League and what the Arab League could do. We say that the African Union is bad. The Arab League is even worse. And it's an organization which has been dysfunctional from the outset. And even the best efforts of the likes of Gamal Abdel Nasser to employ it as a platform for pan-Arabism really came to nothing, especially after the departure of Nasser and to some extent some of the Ba'athist revolutionaries in other countries that came to power. It's divided, it's fragmented, it's rendered incapacitated by all kinds of rivalries and suspicions that a lot of times it simply is better off staying silent than attempting to take any position whatsoever. The Secretariat of the League, which I have had the pleasure of visiting, is terribly weak, terribly weak. And staff of the Secretariat know that there are certain topics that are no-go areas, absolutely not to be touched, no matter the circumstances. So it's why I say that the AU might not be to our satisfaction, but it is still miles ahead for the Arab League, unfortunately. So don't expect anything from the Arab League. I don't know. The note on which I would like to close is that somehow it's really a wish, a fervent wish, that somehow after a period of madness, some wisdom will still prevail to prevent the world from walking into a catastrophic situation. And we are seeing skirmishes, episodes, as it were, of the catastrophe that lies ahead. And every day, the scope of the episodes is widening. And there might be people who have an interest for their own domestic, even personal reasons, in trying to draw as many people, many states into their localized conflicts as possible, in order to globalize them, so to speak. And here in particular, I'm talking of Netanyahu. But I hope there would also be courage and wisdom to realize that we might actually be dealing with a potential zero-sum situation in which all will be losers and almost all will be vanquished. I'm still looking for a way to find a bunker in which I can put myself. Thank you.
Oh, thank you very much. I would like to take this time to thank our panelists. Thank you, Prof Adebayo. Thank you, Mr. Naim Jenah, and thank you, Dr. Thelela, who had to slip out because she had another commitment. I really do appreciate you taking the time, even on such a short notice, to come through and give us your insight on this very important and topical issue. To our panelists, to our attendees online, thank you for making the time. I've read your comments. I see that most are saying that these conversations are necessary. It's definitely perceived as an eye-opener to understanding geopolitics of different regions in the world. Thank you for that encouragement. We're looking to have more of this. I think the next one coming up would definitely reflect on Africa Day. It's still in the works, but we'll definitely communicate closer to the time. But we are taking the time to reflect on Africa Day, especially on the theme of the Africa Day around reparations. But we'll definitely keep you posted. Thank you to our organizers, to our communications manager, our marketing manager, Kimantha and Mane. Thank you very much for the work that you do on behalf of our head of school, Prof. Temba Maseko, as well as colleagues at the WSG. We wish you a very good evening. Stay warm and stay blessed.
Thank you, Eki.